Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about the Metaverse. I am sure many of you have heard of the term, as Facebook's been using it as a way to describe their vision for the company's future and the implementation of their Oculus VR headset and new software to help with collaboration at work. So, what is the Metaverse? Well, Demetrius and I pulled together a description based on the many descriptions that are out there to explain what the metaverse is. And it's the next phase of the internet. Basically, it's a collective shared simulated world that can sometimes blend the virtual world and the real world together. And tools like augmented reality and virtual reality sometimes are used to engage with these worlds. So the question to you as the listener, have you spent a lot of time in these types of experiences? Stuff like Minecraft, The Sims, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XI, Final Fantasy XIV, or even EverQuest? If you have been, then you've been in the metaverse. Good morning, Dee. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I think this is going to be a hell of a topic, really.
It's a big and sometimes very nebulous topic. How do you feel about it when I say, today, let's get into the metaverse?
Well, I think it's something that's really been around for a long time. I was definitely doing kind of lit reviews related to this back in 2001, 2002 when we were working at NASA. Because I was in a lab that focused on virtual environments, and these were all considered virtual environments, and everybody was looking at all of the different economic and sociological phenomenon that were happening when you get a bunch of people into a virtual world, and how they've kind of just naturally, from a psychological standpoint, kind of created mirrors to the real world.
Well, why do we want to go into a virtual world, first of all? Are we just unhappy in the world we live in?
Well, I think there's just a lot of variety that's available within the virtual world. Like you look at some of the gaming environments that have occurred there, and you have Fortnite where you can have like a battle royale, or the original Fortnite where you're actually fighting zombies and things, or you can be like a wizard or all these kinds of things, and have like a variety of different experiences. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 5 has definitely metaverse elements to it, where you're getting into like a multiplayer environment where you're committing crimes and doing crazy things, or being James Bond or whatever else it can be. There's just so many different opportunities out there. And one of the things I thought was really cool is that you can connect with people across the country, around the world, people from different cultures. You can learn about them. You can get to know people. It has a lot more opportunities that are just different from what you have in the real world.
Gosh, a long time ago, I went up to San Francisco. And when I say a long time ago, I mean like in the early 2000s. I went up to San Francisco and they had this virtual reality setup at the Ferry Building. Was it the Ferry Building? No, it was in the Embarcadero buildings over there. And you would pay to go in and they put this big headset on you and you'd stand inside of this like circular, I don't know, arena or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
And then they would immerse you basically in this virtual experience, and then you can run around and you could bounce balls and like throw them at each other and talk to each other and that kind of stuff. And this was a really long time ago. And
Is this at Pier 39?
yeah.
Oh yeah, tourist trap.
So they did it so first they did it at the Embarcadero where they tested it out, and then eventually they moved it over to Pier 39, I think, because it was the same experience.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting about it was I left that experience thinking, if this was done right, this would be your chance to kind of exit the world after a hard day.
Hmm.
You have this real world experience of like you're at school all day, work all day, or whatever it is, and then suddenly you immerse yourself in this other experience, and you can kind of define it however you want. It can be any way that you want it to be. You can meet new people and that kind of stuff. But then also there's this weird experience where once you take it off, what's happening in that world after you've left that world, right? Your brain
Hmm.
goes through a series of questions when you have had a chance to experience this. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually get there again, right? So this was like a big, huge, expensive, obviously, endeavor that they were doing for people to try it out. But here we are in 2021, close to 2022, and everyone is still trying to create this immersive experience. So I have a question for you. Like, where do you see the biggest opportunity, and when are we going to really get sucked into the machine where we feel like this is a second life and we have two lives to manage, the one that we live every day in the real world and the one that virtually there's a lot going on.
Well, I think it's already here. I think the biggest opportunities are, for example, experiences like Fortnite or World of Warcraft that have they've raked in billions, like billions and billions of revenue, and people are going in. I never played World of Warcraft, but I know people who would go in. They'd have it's a persistent virtual world, and when they logged out, things were still happening in that world, and they log back in and they catch up on what they missed. So it is I think the two essential elements of what I would consider a metaverse is a virtual persistent world that continues on when you're not logged in.
Yeah.
So it exists independent of your specific participation, and it's social. So it's has that multiplayer element. So a lot of the MMOs were kind of treading this ground where a bunch of people were congregating in online virtual spaces. The thing that I'm seeing start to emerge now is the interconnectivity between different virtual spaces. So that means that like you can have a persistent identity when you're going from Fortnite to Roblox, for example, and kind of have these games kind of interconnected in a way.
Yeah, that's like a big deal though, because like you're interconnecting different companies' products.
Yes. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is that this will probably do best in environments where companies can play well together, right? Where it's kind of more of the Windows and Android model more than it is like the Apple or Nintendo model where you're kind of in this walled garden. You can only interact with things that are on under that corporate umbrella. But
Yeah.
if you can have Fortnite and Roblox and World of Warcraft and some of these really really big names kind of interacting with each other, then I look at the metaverse kind of hub. Like if you think about Ready Player One, how
Yep.
it used the Oasis as this hub, then I see it as like an accelerant where you can really start to redirect traffic and have games spread in a much more viral way because it catches on within a metaverse community and spreads within that.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there, Ready Player One, and that kind of triggered something in my mind. You and I were talking about where this term metaverse actually came from, right?
Mhm.
Because it keeps getting thrown around now because the term has been used quite a bit within the gaming community, but now you're hearing it more broadly, like on Good Morning America and things like that, because of Facebook saying they're entering into the space
Mhm.
from a B2B perspective. But I did a little research, and it looks like the term metaverse came from Neil Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel called Snow Crash, where humans and avatars basically interact with each other and software agents in a three-dimensional virtual space
Yeah.
that uses the metaphor of the real world. So it's from a sci-fi book, and I think it kind of does tap into what we are really trying to get, which is basically what you're saying, which is you have a physical world, you have a real world, but virtual world, and you can immerse yourself in it. And then when you leave it, it's still going on. Like the world's still growing and building, and these things are still happening. But like, isn't there some anxiety there? Like, oh, I'm leaving my character behind because I have things to do in the real world. What happens to my character? Where do they go? Like, am I going to miss out on opportunities, right? Does this just create more, I guess, anxiety in people and kids that are doing this stuff before and after they go to school and that kind of stuff? I mean, there's a lot of questions around this.
It can be. I mean, there are definitely people who talk about like their experiences with World of Warcraft or League of Legends, where it became like a second job to them, and they at some point decided like I don't want to have this additional responsibility. That I believe there's like entire like memes going around about like people's Minecraft dogs who they have been waiting for their owner to come back for like 10 years now
Oh yeah.
from old worlds. There is this psychological sense of connection to this virtual world because from a psychological standpoint, it has a lot of the same characteristics as the real world, and we project our own kind of experiences of that world onto the world itself, and we kind of make it more real than it actually is in our heads.
Yeah.
So it is kind of it has that element to it, and I think that there are going to be a lot of experimentation around that of how to make it feel kind of persistent but safe, but also sticky. So there's a real balancing act there.
Yeah. Now let's take a pause for a second because you and I both got our degrees and our advanced degrees in psychology. And I want to talk a little bit about the reality of creating a world that feels as real and as important as the world that you currently live in. So, what are the psychological components, would you say, that are necessary to create a metaverse where people will feel like, oh, I don't want to leave my dog waiting for me, or uh, my friend is always around at 2 p.m. in the afternoon at my house in my digital world. Like, I really want to go and see them. I need to be there with them. Like, what are the psychology related components that companies are building in, or probably have to build in order to get that connection?
Well, I mean, number one, just has to be engaging, right? It has to be something where, like, the gameplay design, the experience of whatever the application, the platform in is, has to be engaging to the point where the users are going to be willing to suspend some disbelief. Because people throw around these terms like it feels like the real, it feels as real as the real world. It never really feels as real as the real, but it can take on aspects of the real world. Like there are elements of it that are like can feel very reminiscent of the real world, so that we kind of treat them similarly to the real world. But if it is something where you have a compelling experience, then you stick around, you start to engage, you kind of you just suspend some disbelief so that you can allow yourself to get engaged. And then beyond that, there are certain kind of simulative elements to it. So, like for a Minecraft pet, for example, they'll do things that a real pet will. Like your dog will follow you around, and his tail will go up when he's happy, and he'll bark and when he's excited and things like that. Or they have cats now where they when you go to sleep at night, the cat will jump up on your bed with you, and you can hear it purring. Like
Yeah.
those kinds of things that we know in real life have kind of an experiential element to them, are simulated in the virtual world, and we kind of by extension generalize our real world emotional psychological reactions to those into the virtual world.
Yeah, but I would imagine there's probably a correlation there between the things that drive us in the real world are going to drive us in the virtual world. You would
Mm-hmm.
imagine, right? So for example, if somebody's very financially driven, then they're probably going to be the ones that are in the digital world, like opening up a shop and
Oh
buying
yeah.
real estate, right? And then people who are driven by community and connectiveness are going to be out talking to everyone and making
Mm-hmm.
friends. And that's what I would imagine. And how do you design for the fact that there's a variability across so many people for what actually motivates them and drives them to be engaged, right?
Wait, I mean, in general, you create a sandbox and you allow for this functionality to occur, like creating, you allow for an economy to spring up, and the rest you just let people do what they do because humans will naturally start to organize their world in that way. So you just create capabilities and let it go. For the most part, what I said before about kind of having like this simulative element where the cat behaves like a cat, once you start adding kind of multiplayer elements of real people interacting with each other, especially with voice chat being enabled now through platforms like Discord,
Uh-huh.
uh, it just hits the turbo button on all that. It takes it all to like another level of immersion because now you have very real feeling because it's ultimately is real. It's just happening through virtual space of interaction with other people. So that all is just another accelerant on the immersive element of that experience. And then you just create the tools for to allow them to do it themselves. You create those opportunities, and some of them will naturally gravitate towards those.
Yeah. I mean, somebody asked me the other day a really interesting question. They said, if you commit a crime in the digital world, should you be punished in the real world for it?
That depends on the crime.
Yeah. So like for example, like if you're a thief in the digital world and you steal some sort of currency or something like that in the digital world, and then you just shut off your computer and walk away from it, right? Should you be punished in some way in the real world, right? I feel like there's a lot of like philosophy based questions regarding
Sure.
what this means, because I mean, you have a degree in philosophy, right? So you and I are always like challenging each other on these things. But like I guess it depends, right? So if you're harming people in a different world, like
Yeah,
right,
if you're being abusive, or if you're doxing or something like that, or if you're there was swatting was a thing for a while, which is something that happened in the real world, but it kind of originally originated in this metaverse. Are you familiar with the practice of swatting?
swatting, no, what is
Yeah.
that?
So basically, what happens is if you end up in a dispute with somebody and they're able to dox you in some way and they find out where you live, they can actually call the cops on you and
Oh,
report.
swatting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what? I read about this because I was like, dude, that's nuts that
Well,
someone
somebody
would do
got
this.
killed
Oh,
because they I guess somebody was using a VPN or something, or somebody got access to an old address. So they called the cops and reported like an active shooter situation. The cop showed up to the wrong house, directed the guy to surrender. The guy was like, "What's going on?" And they shot him, and the guy died. So I believe the person who called in the fake situation ended up going to prison for it.
wow. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen then in
Mm-hmm.
these digital worlds. I was talking to someone the other day about this topic because I always try to talk to a lot of people prior to the podcast just to make sure that I'm not like my experiences are not siloed. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that they said was, hold on, I was taking a drink of my coffee. One of the things that they said was, is as it becomes more real, like visually real, you're going to probably start to feel more emotionally responsible and connected to what happens in that world.
Yeah, I don't even think it necessarily requires that. There were examples of gangs forming online around League of Legends, and at one point there was an actual a gang fight in South Korea where I guess somebody stole somebody else's exclusive like special weapon within League of Legends,
Uh huh.
and they hunted that person down, and there was like a rumble in a internet cafe in South Korea. Like the the items and things can be virtual, and the environment can be virtual, but the important thing to remember that within this space everything social is
Hmm.
100% real.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is no difference. I mean, it's just you and I in a digital world communicating as real people,
Hmm. So
right?
the avatars that we're using in the environments that surround us are fake, but our communication, our interaction is 100% real.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It like pushes your. It's very fascinating topic to me because we do a ton of research in this space. You and I should probably mention that.
Yeah.
So we work with a lot of different companies and stuff, thinking about different applications for things like this. And the more immersive it gets, the more interested I get
Hmm.
because I find that if I feel like I'm actually there, then I'm almost more committed to some of the decisions that I make when I'm in that world, right? And you mentioned something which I thought was really interesting when we were talking about this yesterday. Is kind of our pre podcast was you'd sent me that article from like the 1997 talking about BBS systems, like bulletin board systems, where people would dial in to a connected system and that system would have a game on it and then you could play the games, and
Hmm.
how you were like, this is essentially a metaverse because people back then in the 70s and 80s and 90s on BBS systems were communicating with each other. They were playing games together. They were exchanging items for currency.
Yeah.
And so essentially, it really hasn't changed. It's just evolved in the quality and of both the gaming as well as the hardware and everything. And then I realized I played those in the 1990s. I played Thieves Guild, which came
Hmm.
out in 1988. I really enjoyed it, had a lot of fun with it. And I think I was telling you that it wasn't until you brought that up yesterday that it triggered a memory that when I was at school, I remember somebody offering physical money for an action to be taken in the game. And I
Yeah.
kind of just brushed it off because it was like, I was like, oh, no, no thanks or something. And
Yeah.
that was it. And I realized, oh, wow, okay, that's happening now. Only difference is we actually have current quote unquote currencies that people can exchange for real US dollar now or whatever country you
Yeah.
live in.
I mean, it's been seen in a lot of these games that I mean, the games might have their own in game economy, like that. This happened with Final Fantasy 11, it happened with World of Warcraft, and it happens on Minecraft SMP servers, where you can have an in game currency that's designed to, or economy that's designed to work a certain way, but if the economy is not sufficiently robust to cover the needs of the users, you can have an ad hoc separate economy pop up
Uh-huh.
using their own currency that they decide upon, where they will basically mirror real world economies in order to kind of fit their needs. Like you can see this on Minecraft SMPs, where they started using diamonds because it's a limited resource; it's not renewable,
Mm.
in order to trade for goods and services. And this is separate from the in-game currency, which are emeralds, which are used to trade with villagers. So this kind of stuff happens all the time. Same thing with World of Warcraft, where people would trade real money for rare items within the game, and you could buy them on eBay
Hmm.
way back in like 10, 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
this is all like when you say like what do they have to do in order to accommodate people's kind of interest of what they're doing?
Yep.
Basically all you have to do is just get out of their way.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And there's a lot of people getting into this space. I want to talk a little bit about the categories because I read this great New York Times article, which we will post, where I thought that they did a good job of separating like companies that are interested in creating like a full metaverse experience versus adjacent companies, ones that like you're kind of in it but you're not fully in it, and then basically like hardware companies that are trying to support the metaverse through the development of their hardware. So the first one is gaming, and I think that's really the space. But with gaming, I mean, it's not just about playing a game anymore. It's about making money. Like there's a lot of people that make a tremendous amount of money within these games doing lots of different things. So we have like Decentraland, which is really popular. That's a platform that is decentralized, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You have InView, which is Together Labs. You have Roblox, Animal Crossing, Fortnite, Discord. Like all of these names technically could be metaverse companies because of that
Mhm.
broad description of what the metaverse are. Some are metaverse adjacent, like Animal Crossing and others, where you're engaging and you're communicating, but maybe you're not exchanging currency as much, or maybe it's not like a full immersed experience. And then you have experiences like MView and Decentraland, where you really are living in a different world and completing tasks and running stores and selling items and moving currency around. How do you think about it when you think about the different games and some of the ones that like I listed off of like full experience versus like adjacent experience?
Well, I think that one of the things that stuck out for me is when you mentioned Decentraland as being popular. It is in a sense, right? Because it's getting a lot of attention, and
Yeah.
the spend per user is way higher than many other virtual experiences. But the actual amount of users in the game are, or at least in the environment, I'm not entirely sure that gaming is the right term for that, but it is a virtual space where people can congregate and interact with each other. But it has a certain level of popularity, but it's almost kind of a different level of popularity that we normally think of for games like Fortnite or Roblox or things like
Well,
that.
I'll give you some numbers if you want. So, for example, Decentraland.
Hmm.
Now, I can't verify this number because it's been a little challenging to kind of get it, but a couple of people have online have kind of worked through the numbers and stuff, and they're averaging around 10,000 daily active users. Is what
Yeah,
it says. I don't know if this is 100% accurate or not. I got to be clear about that. But if you just look at like Fortnite, Epic Games Fortnite, it's like 6 to 12 million,
yeah,
and then Roblox is like 33 million daily active users. So there is a big difference between 10,000 daily active users and 12 million, but Decentraland is getting a lot of attention because the users that are in there are making investments and buying
yeah.
land and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on real estate, opening stores and things like that. It feels gamish to me in the sense that you're going there and you're like building casinos and playing in casinos and having fun, but it also kind of feels like just like an investment vehicle. So
Yeah, it's a little scary to me, to be honest, because and it is. I kind of treat it the Central Land specifically as a bit of an experiment because it is new in that way that you are spending virtual currency, or you're spending virtual currency that is derived from fiat currency. I mean, they're cryptocurrencies really, in order to buy virtual property. So it's in basically a DAO, right? A decentralized autonomous organization. So it's not
Yeah.
the same thing as like a corporate run uh, normal server. So what happens, for example, if the system crashes or they stop maintaining it and all of that virtual property goes away? Like, I don't know what safeguards are in place in order to protect
Yeah.
people. It seems like something that, like, on some level, like the SEC will want to take a look at that. However, you know, some people might consider that like a bad thing. Some people might consider that a good thing, but it is something that will probably potentially happen going forward. And it raises all these questions because, as I said before, everything that the world may be virtual, but all of the social elements of it are 100% real, including the social and psychological perceptions of ownership.
Yep.
And that leads to envy and crime, or feelings of poverty, even if it's just a virtual poverty. Like, all of these things can exist at the same place, and the all the psychological factors are 100% real, which means that they can lead to other things like theft, assault, hacking, all of these other things that we worry about. Like I said before, you in order to let these behaviors emerge, all you have to do is get out of their way, and that is the same thing for all the undesirable behavior. Is that it's gonna pop up? It's gonna happen. Anything that can happen in the virtual world from a social, in the real world from a social perspective, can and will happen in a virtual world.
Yeah. And I'll call you out on something that you said early on. So this is the big debate right now is like as we transition from valuing physical assets to valuing digital assets the same, like
Mm-hmm.
saying, like an NFT, a non-fungible token, right? Is like you have a token associated with something that you quote unquote own and that's unique and it's on the blockchain. And we can have a whole conversation just about that, which we have. And the idea is that it would never go away. So you said like, well, what if the company decides to not maintain it anymore? And I think with companies like Decentraland, what they're testing out and other companies that are doing this as well is how do we open up this network so that it's mostly owned by the user and then it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of grows on its own. It gets funded on its own. It's just continues to grow and exist and live forever. And then we can intellectually say to ourselves, well, it's not going anywhere. So then it is okay for me to go on there and spend $800,000 and buy a plot of land with a house on it,
Yeah.
because that will be a future space that I can go to at any time. And that's mine and I own that. But I know that you see it differently for sure, because we've had this conversation many times and you're like, you have to be transparent about how that works and the safeguards associated. Because if the company decides one day that they don't want to do it anymore, where does all those physical assets go? Like, are they on the blockchain? So suddenly I can just move them to a different platform? Is that how it works? Or is it something where, that's something you sign off on when you buy a $800,000 plot of land on Decentraland?
Well, I think there has to be some kind of contingency plan in place, right? Something kind of like a virtual equivalent to like an FDIC insurance, right? Like, if for some reason these servers corrupt, and if it's distributed, I don't believe Decentraland can run completely on the blockchain. As far as the servers running, I think the ownership um, of the NFTs, which are basically the plots of land as well as like pieces of art within them,
Yep.
those I think are registered on a blockchain, but I don't believe you can run an entire virtual environment on the blockchain at this point in time. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's potentially coming. So, what does happen if those servers corrupt or they get shut down, or you have some kind of an attack on those servers and they're irrecoverable? Then you still have a record of your ownership of that plot of land, but that plot of land can't be accessible. Then I imagine there should be some contingency plan in place in order for achieving that. Otherwise, it's like owning a sinkhole in real life.
let's talk a little bit about this kind of B2B play that's happening. So, Facebook, Oculus, which is owned by Facebook, Microsoft, Nvidia, all these companies basically are contributing to the metaverse because they're building hardware to support it. So, Oculus creates these really cool headsets, that you can wear. Nvidia creates the chips, for the video cards and things like that. And then also the software. Oh, and then Microsoft has like the holodeck, and then you have your software that can connect you into these virtual worlds. And specifically, let's talk about the one that recently was released, which is Facebook's virtual avatar meeting software.
Yeah.
So you can actually put on the Oculus headset, connect up to this meeting, and then sit around a table as an avatar and communicate with other workers in a space like that. Do you consider that to be the metaverse?
I mean, it's not a persistent virtual environment, so I wouldn't necessarily consider it a metaverse. I mean, it's not. I don't imagine that these rooms are meaningfully kind of persistent. It's not like you can go in there and maybe they can, where they're creating persistent rooms where you can decorate it how you want and then it's saved and you go back into it.
Yeah.
But it's the Facebook one it kind of mystifies me for a variety of reasons. It seems like they're trying to find a solution for a technology that they purchased a while ago and haven't really found a solution for it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't know that there's a lot of need for a virtual meeting space within businesses. It seems a little bit like doing so, especially if you're talking about like an actual like head mounted display VR, right? As opposed to just using like a typical display based avatar interaction like you would see on something like MView.
Hmm.
Is it seems like a lot of work to go to a meeting. On top of that, Facebook, I don't believe, unless I'm really missing something, has never really been a B2B company other than advertising. Um,
No.
which raises the question of like, am I going to start seeing advertising in the middle of my corporate meeting? And it's also when you brought it up, they are probably the company that I would least want to trust with my corporate data. Like if we're going to be sharing decks or talking about confidential information,
Yeah.
I would prefer it not to go through Facebook.
Yeah, that is something that's come up. Like I've read some of the comments on some of the video interviews that he's done, that Mark Zuckerberg has done, and people saying stuff like, "Oh, I don't, who's gonna host my data? Like, are they gonna see it, or am I just sharing it? But then it'll never be saved on your servers." A lot of questions. But let me ask you this: would you be interested in having your own virtual office that is yours and owned by you and can be decorated by you and as big as you want it to be? And then if somebody wants to communicate with you through our company or through another company for work, and they say, "Hey, I'm going to meet you at your virtual office," and then they kind of walk in the door and it says, "Oh, someone's there," and then you just grab your little headset, you pop it on, and suddenly you're like in the room with them and communicating with them. Do you think that would have a use case at all? Like where it'd be like interesting and productive and helpful with innovation or anything?
I think it could. I think the use case is at that point you're kind of showing off your creativity and vision for space design. So maybe you put it on the beach with a great sunset, and then you add in like really awesome furniture, or maybe you're buying furniture from some kind of a or virtual furniture from some virtual shop somewhere that's designed by other human beings.
Yeah.
It's a way to kind of show off uh, your creativity or your design eye. I don't know if that's always the case, and I think there are definitely going to be people who are going to feel like it is a distraction from productivity tasks,
Yeah.
or or they're going to feel intimidated. Like, okay, I don't, I'm not an interior designer. I don't really want to be an interior designer. Uh, at that point, I don't know if they're going to want to engage with that, or maybe they'll just try to figure out like hire some designer or something like that. But it is kind of like diverting resources from something that could be spent elsewhere.
Well, maybe I should reframe this.
But
We don't we don't
if
we
your
don't want to
question is, do I want to? Not particularly. No.
if I should reframe it this way. If I No matter what, every week you and I have to have meetings, right? Would you rather have a meeting over Zoom or would you rather have a meeting in a virtual office as an avatar?
Uh, I would honestly. and I think you're seeing this in what is actually taking off right now.
Uh-huh.
Is it's less engagement, it's not more. It's less immersive, it's not more. I would prefer to do a lot of conversation over Slack or Teams or even just a phone call than I would a video call. And I think that is going to be further magnified when you get into younger demographics of people
Hmm.
who are much prefer to use Slack, and Slack is taking off.
Yeah.
Zoom is also taken off, but I don't know that VR is really it. I mean, you look at Discord. Discord is taken off within the gaming space, and I don't think they even have a video call functionality.
I think they do now. I should know this, but I think they
I
do
mean, if they do,
now.
I've never used it. It's been you when it comes to Discord, which is how Discord kind of represents a little bit more of how I think people would like to interact when they're not don't have a corporate requirement for anything. Is they will tend to chat unless they're in the middle of a gaming experience, like a multiplayer gaming experience, like a raid or something in an MMO. Then they'll jump onto voice chat, but a lot of it is text-based communication, unless it's like a romantic interaction or something like that.
Yeah. So in 2020, the reason why you're probably not recalling it is because, 2020 was a major blur for all of us. Is that they did add a server video feature for
For
web and
Discord,
desktop. Yeah. Within,
yeah,
I haven't used it yet either. And I love
I don't.
Discord.
Yeah, I don't know that it's taken off. I'd really like to see the data on how much that's used.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another couple things let's talk about. So on the consumer side, there's been a lot of reports of like Apple has a secret AR project. So I don't know, they have something up their sleeve.
Well,
But
I would counter that by saying apparently Apple has every technology under the sun in some kind of a secret project. So.
yeah, they probably do. Yeah. But also, one of the experiences that I had, which was just beyond amazing, was I did AR shopping
Hmm.
where you click on an item, let's say like a piece of furniture, and then you can lift up your phone, put it in your house, and then it shows you what it would look like and in that location. And I find it incredibly helpful. But there's this new level that some companies are addressing, which is once you put it in there, you can also crowdsource like options to people, either professionals, like a professional designer, or just through the community and say like, hey, what do you guys think about this chair in the corner? Do you think it would look nice? Or, this bookshelf or whatever it is, and then get feedback, crowdsourced feedback. Do you consider that being part of the metaverse?
Um, the Amazon experience, I wouldn't consider that. What I would consider is something like I believe there are platforms out there. I found one at one point and then I forget about it. It was a while back where you could like decorate out an entire space and then it gets saved, so it's kind of somewhat persistent. And
Yep.
then if you add in like a social element where now you can have your friends over to see your virtual space, that I would consider metaverse. And I'm thinking through the use cases, like because I don't think it would be the kind of thing where like you're just buying all the furniture that you can't afford, because that's ultimately just a little depressing. I think it's more like you are creating and or using furniture and other elements that are not possible in the real world, right? Like maybe you're have some kind of vapor chair or something like that. Things that or you're using fire in your home in a way that's not wouldn't be safe to do it in a new home, and it has to bring in something that goes beyond what's capable within normal reality.
I mean, and that's why I keep asking these questions, because when I was doing my research, I mean, we already kind of work in the space, but also doing more deep dive research, a lot of people say, oh, well, if you're using this hardware, you're part of the metaverse. If you're doing this, you're part of metaverse. And I was like, metaverse is like the idea of connecting these two components, the real world and the virtual world, and it being persistent, right? I think you could have done things that are metaverse like and
Mhm.
are reaching toward the metaverse, but it's not really maybe that pure experience. And I think that's also another thing too, is that word metaverse has been kind of blown up over the last couple of months, and it's growing, and a lot of people want to contribute to it and stuff like that. So that's good, because it's kind of growing the segment. But we don't have a clear definition that makes everyone look at it and say, okay, that's specifically
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z. And does it matter? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't even matter. But it is interesting to me because so many people are talking about it. But what I want to do is switch gears here and talk about the metaverse when it comes to centralized versus decentralized. So, New York Times did a great piece on the metaverse, and we will share that on Twitter. And they pointed out that the conversation around differentiation is also around whether or not the platforms are centralized, meaning they're controlled mostly by a company like Epic Games controls Fortnite, right? Or decentralized, where the users control most of it, or like Demetrius mentioned, like a DAO, basically a decentralized entire company. And that would be something like Decentraland. And so, what do you think are like the pros and cons of one versus the other? Like, what makes like a centralized better or worse than a decentralized gaming platform?
Um, I, I, I've struggled with this, and I've been trying to look into it. I don't necessarily see what the advantages are at this point in time in a decentralized virtual environment. Like
Yeah,
it's maybe when Web3 is fully realized and everything is running off a collection of smartphones and laptops
yeah,
as kind of distributed server systems. But right now, it seems as though like a decentral, like something work running. Well, we're talking about two different things a little bit, right? We're talking about centralized ownership versus decentralized ownership versus centralized uh, operations versus decentralized operations. So for corporate ownership versus decentralized ownership, it's not clear to me yet what the advantages are. Decentraland will kind of tout their voting elements, but I don't know how they're implemented or how that's helpful if because if you disagree with the decisions that's made, it's you disagree. The fact that it's made by a collection of users versus a corporation doesn't really change anything as far as I'm concerned. It's still you still agree or disagree, and at the same time, it's really murky how some of the decentralized ownership or influence. I don't know if it's even ownership. I don't know if having kind of voting rights within a DAO is considered the same as equity within that organization. I don't know if a DAO allows for things like acquisitions or
hmm,
transfers of ownership or an IPO or any of those things which we associate with a traditional corporation. So I don't know how it would function if one of those things came up. Like if somebody came along and wanted to buy Decentraland, I don't know how it would work. I don't know how it would affect the people who are have elements of who have voting rights within it. I assume that they would vote yes or no, but I don't know if they get paid out from the acquisition or if they
yeah,
want to take it private or if they're prevented from doing that, taking it private. And then the same thing with kind of decentralized operations. If this was all running on kind of a decentralized network of independent devices instead of like corporate servers, maybe it would potentially be more robust and there would be less control over it. And I think that can be a good thing or a bad thing because, like with anything social, you can see anything pop up. So if you started seeing a bunch of doxing and swatting and all kinds of things, if it's decentralized, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to stop it.
absolutely. And this reminds me of a conversation you and I had about 5 or maybe 8 years ago, where there was that company, and I don't know if they're still doing it. And the idea was they were going to take a huge boat or like a barge or something, and they were going to move it out into international waters outside of San Francisco. Do you remember this? And it was called like
Yes.
Blue Seed or something, right? And
I
then
was
they
like,
said,
no, thanks.
yeah. So here's the deal. So then you would take a boat or a helicopter out to this huge barge or
Yeah, it was
business or
a Peter
whatever.
Thiel kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and
That's
it
what
was
his
in
brain told
international
him.
waters, and then you would build your startup there, and then you wouldn't have to pay taxes and all this stuff. It was
Yeah.
very interesting and crazy. And the first thing you said to me when you said, "Okay, it's not connected to any government, it's not connected to any like municipalities that are, overlooking behavior and that kind of stuff," is you said, well, what happens if someone just steals your stuff? What happens if someone kills you? What happens? It's like there has to be some sort of like structure built around something. And I
Yeah.
think that 99.999% of the people out there have no idea what a DAO is. They don't understand that people want to have a system set up where there is no overarching power structure.
Yeah.
But also, there's a ton to think about when you're doing that. And what happens when something does go awry? Like, you have no one to look to and say, hey, by the way, this
Yeah.
is not working. Let's get a team together and fix it. You have to assume that the community is going to want to get together and fix it.
Well, I've been saying this over and over again. Anything social is 100% real. So if you end up into like an anarchistic situation where there is not a system of control, where it is very wild, wild west, and you're wronged, you have no recourse, then it's unpredictable. I mean, things will happen. That's one thing that is predictable. Anything that could happen will happen. So crimes will happen within that space, abuse will happen within that space, all kinds of things. The question is how much and what are the countermeasures that are available.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second here, and we'll kind of wrap up on that. But one thing I wanted to point out is I think the big selling point that everybody gets excited about when it comes to decentralized is the fact that when you own something and you put it on the blockchain, if you decide that you don't want to engage with that community anymore, you can take it with you, so to speak. You can own it, and if you choose to potentially apply it to another platform, you can, or you want to sell it off and make money off of the time and energy
Mhm.
that you put into the game or the experience, you can do that. And it's much harder to do that with a centralized gaming experience. That's the theory
Yeah.
behind it, right? And so that one selling point is kind of driving, I think, people to explore and think about this decentralized company and decentralized gaming experience altogether. But I do want to wrap up with the title of my note here. Actually, the metaverse is not perfect. There is a dark side. I did a little research and found that a lot of these companies deal with a lot of issues, right? We've known for the longest time that, for example, like on YouTube, you'll find inappropriate stuff that has to get removed and deleted and stuff. But even games like Roblox has dealt with like clubs getting built, sex parties, Nazis. These aren't these aren't going to go away. So all of these companies deal with bad behavior the same that you would in the real world, but they're dealing with it in the digital world. Is this just going to get worse? Is it just going to get even more complicated? Because if you open up a strip club, for example, on a kid driven gaming platform, do they just shut it down or do you get in trouble for that in real world, right? Like, I feel like some of these things are starting to get confusing for a lot of people.
Well, I think you're going to have to set some kind of criterion for what's considered like a virtual crime. But
Yeah.
anything like you look at where social is now. We did a whole podcast on how social kind of like became what it is now, where it's not the most pleasant place in the world. Like you look at platforms like Twitter and Facebook and all of the vitriol that's going on and the tribalism and all those kinds of things. Not to mention just like the the extremism and the like terrorist recruiting. These are all things that very much can extend into the metaverse. Anything that's going on in social can extend into the metaverse because that social element is ultimately the same. So it's gonna be very important for anybody to be able to figure out a strategy in order to keep things under control.
Yeah.
One of the places I keep looking at is like Disney, right? Disney looked at buying Twitter a while back and they decided not to because they didn't want their brand necessarily associated with all the things that are going on with Twitter. I
Yeah.
assume. But you look at how they establish like what is acceptable within their parks and make sure that it remains a positive, happy environment, which is really hard to do when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people in the same place.
Sure.
And to some extent, something like that has to be established within these worlds. And you see it happen a bit with reputation scores and banning and things like that. It's one of the things I worry about when it comes to going fully decentralized is, how would that work? How do you take care of the Nazis and prostitution and, criminal organizations coming in and recruiting people to join ISIS or Taliban or whatever else is out there?
Yeah, I agree. It's a big topic that needs a lot of work on it, and it's going to be work forever, just like Twitter's dealing with these issues today as they did
Yeah.
5 and 10 years ago, right?
And to be
Um,
fair, like this is not unique to the virtual space. This is all real world stuff that's starting in the real world and just leaking into these virtual spaces. So
yep.
this is not a problem just for, tech and social in order to figure out. This is a problem for all of society that we've been working on since the beginning of humanity.
Yeah. And with that said, I just had one last question. What are you looking forward to in the metaverse? Is there anything coming out soon that you're excited about, like whether it be a game or an experience or anything like that that you've been researching that you're gonna test out?
I can't really think of anything specifically right now. I think that what we're going to see is kind of the interconnectivity between these kind of metaversal games and create a bit of a hub where you have a persistent identity and a persistent social group that can travel between kind of game environments, and that's
Hmm.
something that I think is going to be very, very interesting. But I think where people are going to find success with this is by focusing on kind of the gameplay and the core experiences first, and
Hmm.
the interconnectivity between those, the metaversal elements of those second. So you have your Roblox and your Fortnite or your World of Warcraft first, and make that a really compelling, good experience. And then you add the kind of interconnectivity metaversal elements on top of it, and that kind of takes it to a next level.
Yeah, that's going to be super exciting, and I'm also looking forward to trying out some of the VR headsets that are coming out in the next couple of years, which are going to be a lot lighter, a lot more relaxed. On your
Mhm.
face, they're not as aggressive, and just kind of see where that stuff goes too. There might be some fun gaming experiences in there that you can enjoy and maybe connect with the same way that currently do, but just in a more immersive experience. But with that, I think that's a wrap for today. I want to thank everyone so much for taking the time to listen to us. We really appreciate it. We'll be posting links to many of the sources that we referenced on Twitter. So you can find us and follow us at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one. If you like this podcast and found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you next week.